Well, hello everyone. Welcome once again to Luke Reacts. This time I am reacting to what happened this week in Rafah. For those who are following along at home, Rafah is the last real stronghold for Hamas in Gaza. It's towards the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is not very big; it's only 25 miles long, and it's the last kind of holdout for Hamas. And earlier this week, in an attack to get to two things. One, it was that there was a rockets that were launched at Tel Aviv, about a dozen rockets coming out of Rafah, actually. And then there were two senior Hamas officers who were targeted by Israel. The subsequent explosion, it it spread beyond the intended target and ended up hitting a bunch of like a tent city, and between 40 to 50 people died. And it became a big international story. Rafah has already been a big story. Whether you're for or against Israel, well, if you're against Israel, Rafah is kind of the last stronghold for Hamas. So maybe that's part of it. But there was a video, or actually an image that was put on Instagram, and the image is all eyes on Rafa, and it's kind of written out. I want to say like in tents. In the background is snowy mountains, so it's obviously not Israel because there's not snowy mountains in Israel. But it was shared far and wide. I mean, there's so many. I mean, the picture went viral, millions of shares and likes and views and whatever, like even like more than there are Jews in the world, that kind of thing, right? So it was important, I think, for us to react to what happened in Rafah, and so we put out our own thing here. We asked people to give us your questions. What do you want to know about Rafah? What's the questions you have? And so we got about 30 questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will go through a bunch of them, and just one after another, and see how this goes. I think it's really important that in our understanding of these types of situations, that we lean into an understanding of truth, right? And the truth that I want us to focus on is there's just you got to take a step back always. It's very easy to pile on, to join in the fray. Like, people are expecting to hear from me, so I better talk about this. Um, and you can very easily get caught up in the propaganda machine, because this is one of those examples. Again, it's like the hospital situation at the beginning of the Gaza war, where reports went out that Israel bombed a hospital and 500 people are dead, and there was international condemnation from everybody, including even it was a Christian hospital, so it was it was even worse. Well, it turned out Israel didn't bomb the hospital at all. It was an Islamic Jihad rocket that inerrantly hit the parking lot, and it didn't even strike the hospital. But it didn't matter. You can still find, like, people. Nobody's taken that down. Nobody's said, "Oh, sorry, we jumped the gun on that." And same things here, right? So why does the media keep falling for Hamas propaganda? Well, I think each of us is predisposed to jumping on the side that we're predisposed to agree with. And I have said over and over that I do believe that so much of this conflict and the perception of Israel is spiritual. I don't think it is just simply, a preference. It's not like your typical, the right left in America kind of thing. Um, it's deeper than that, and I think there's a predisposition against Israel. It's found you see it, you saw it with the incident at the hospital, in the first couple weeks of the war, and you see it now in the last 2 weeks of the war. This war's going to come to an end soon. Um, Rafah is kind of the last stronghold, and at any point, uh, this war could have been over if Hamas did two things: put down their weapons and release the hostages. This war would be over. And so every death of any civilian in Gaza is a direct result of Hamas's aggression. It could end at any time. So be praying for that. Pray that Hamas will be defeated soon and this war will come to an end. I think that's appropriate. What else we got here? Okay. Um, how do you to react and respond and justify the current escalation of growing anti-Semitism and global outrage? Well, there's a couple of ways you can respond. I mean, you should always respond, you know, um, in the way that's closest to you, right? There's this great principle you find in Catholic social teaching called subsidiarity, and it's a big word, but basically it means, the people closest to the issue are the ones who are best able to respond to it, right? So, I unless you're in a position of significant power, you are, I don't know if you're likely or unlikely, but it's not like you're gonna be able to totally change uh, the international situation in regard to anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. Uh, it's not likely. But I would encourage you, everybody who is listening to me, to find out where your local synagogue is, or if you have a local, a Jewish deli, whatever. Just go and say, listen, I like the world's against you. I get it, but I'm not. And it's the little things like that. I'm telling you, they add up. We might not fix the whole world, but we can each do something. Uh, and I've always made that uh, part of my how I engage in when there's big issues that I am not necessarily able to solve because they're far away, or I'm busy. I can still do something. I can still do something. Another question: how do you respond to the hate shown to pro-Israelis at this moment? So my rule, uh, and I try and practice this. I'm not always the best at it because I'm just a guy. Is to walk in the opposite spirit. That's and if they hate on you, don't hate back. I try, and when I'm at these, I'm often can be the only non-Jew at sometimes the only person at an anti-Israel rally, and I try very intentionally to have a big smile on my face, because to me it's what I'm doing. I'm on the right side of history, because I see at the end of history, Israel and the Jewish people are right there, and so I know I'm on the right side. And so in this moment of anger and gnashing of teeth, I'm gonna laugh. We do need more comedy in this space, for sure. But I would not let it get to you. Try and avoid, like, learn to have a little bit of a thick skin on this. I learned this a long time ago, that if you don't react when people are just screaming at you, it just, it heaps coal on their heads, right? Like it's in the Bible also, right? Like you just don't react in the way that people expect, and it just drives them crazy. Um, all right, so one more question here: why doesn't the international community condemn Hamas for hiding amongst civilians? Well, because they support them. They support Hamas, it seems. And the condemnation is in one direction consistently. It is, and one could argue, and I think yeah, one could argue that the perception is that Israel is strong and Hamas is weak, right? Like there's this there we have been indoctrinated um, to think in terms of what's called power imbalances, right? So, if you're of the perception, if your frame of reference is that Israel is strong and Hamas is weak, the default position, and this is often the default position of a lot of people, is that um, the strong are wrong and the weak are right. And that's probably in some ways the case here. The condemnation against Hamas is pretty weak, especially recently, and I think it has a lot to do with the perception that they're the underdogs at this point, and we like to root for the underdogs. And so here's even though the underdogs are brutal and did some absolutely horrible things, is we're still dealing with the framing of this is as a power imbalance structure. Now the thing is, like, I don't see Israel as the like the strong and Hamas is weak, because Hamas is part of an Islamist movement that is all across the Near East, right? So there are 300 million Arabs in, let's call it, the Near East, okay, or Muslims, right? And if 10% of that 300 million is um, is Islamist, meaning that their vision for the world is Islamic domination, and it will be achieved by the sword, then you're talking about 30 million people, okay? And let's say even half of those 30 million of the Islamists are actually like violently oriented towards violence. You're still dealing with 15 million people. Uh, at 15 million people, you are still larger than the number of Jews in the world. Okay. Well, it's right around the same, but it's like in the whole world. You're not even talking to Israel. Israel's got like 8 million Jews, 9 million people, or 10 million people. So it's like it's it really comes down to to me it comes down to what your like the what the angle you're viewing it from. You know, to me, Israel is strong against Hamas, but weak against the rest of, if Hamas is part of the global Islamist movement, it's small, right? So it really does matter how you look at this stuff. Um, and so yeah, that answers that question. Um, why does no one respond or refer to Hamas and their hoarding weapons among civilians? Again, like the default position is to believe Hamas, and it's only after the fact that it doesn't it don't it that the truth comes out. But by that time, everybody's kind of moved on. I mean, here it is at the end of the week, and the this was the news story until Uh, the jury, found Donald Trump guilty, and now that's the big story. But it was the big story for the whole week up until yesterday. So it has to do with predisposition, I think, and there is this saying. I don't quite know who it's attributed to. Maybe it's Mark Twain or somebody like that. But like basically, the lie goes halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants on, right? Like, um, and yeah, that's been the case the whole time. And we're in when we're living in a world where the reaction is so instantaneous, so quick, that we have to, uh, we often get caught up in whatever the moment is. um, Similarly, question, could Israel have done more to protect the civilians? Well, Israel has done more to protect civilians than any other military in history. In history, I'm not lying, right? And I'm not exaggerating. This is Israel goes out of its way, and the world doesn't care. And they do it because they're moral people, and what they're up against is immoral in a group of people who have committed themselves to an ideology that uses civilians as fodder for their cause. They know that it will bring the kind of outcome that they want. Um, all right, so need to speed up a little bit here. Why are there no Christians in Gaza? Well, because they left. Uh, Before the war, there was about 900 Christians left in Gaza, maximum 900, probably closer to 700. Years ago, the Philos Project worked to um, get some of the families, get some of the big families of Christians out of Gaza and get them into the West Bank. We sponsored a bunch. They were allowed to come to Israel a couple times a year, or come out of Gaza and into the West Bank. That would be Easter or Christmas to spend with be part of the Christian processions that happen in those times of years or those times of the year. And at that time we counted about 700 or 750 Christians left in Gaza, and it is dropped, um, because you know the reality is that Christians across the whole of the Middle East are leaving. In 1900, 25% of the population of Turkey was Christian. Now it's 2%, something like that. Places, Lebanon was 70%. Now it's 35%. There was in 1950, um, 5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, 125,000. Now, you could say that's because you can blame everything. You can blame the U.S. military or the West or whatever, but it's basically Islam has the saying: first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. First we drive out the Jews, and then we'll drive out the Christians. And there's probably not a more ethnically, religiously homogenous place in all the planet other than like the Gaza Strip. It is basically, almost 100% Arab Muslim, and uh, yeah, the Christians just it's like the economy's not great for them. Their kids are always at risk. Um, you find this happening a lot among the cops in Egypt. Uh, the Christian girls marry Muslim men, and they become Muslims. The kids are raised Muslims, and that line dies. Or they're kidnapped and forced into marriage, or they're through just the problem of discrimination. It's a lot easier just to, why suffer at the hands of, the just perpetual kind of stereotyping that is happening to Christians in the region. It's just a lot easier to live in the West. It's just, and everybody knows somebody, a family member, and so it's a lot easier to just immigrate to the West and leave. And so that's what's happening. It's why there's so few Christians in Gaza. And the international aid workers are not necessarily Christian. They're not doing, you know, the amount of Christian evangelism is very small. And so it's one of those places where there used to be a thriving Christian community, and just by the pressures of life, it goes away. Let me zoom out a bit, um, and give some context. And as Christians, well, at the Philos Project, but I would say this is a good thing for Christians to affirm as well. We should be realistic about the world in which we live, right? We live in a world that is fallen. The Bible tells us that. Um, uh, the heart is desperately wicked above all else. That's what Romans says. We are oriented towards sin and selfishness. Like the default position of humanity is not necessarily justice, but injustice. Um, and in that world, there will be war. And there's a lot of people that say that, oh, before Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome, every we were pacifists, and we didn't fight, and we don't join. We were the church was pure. Well, first of all, let me just say that the first empire uh, to adopt Christianity as the official religion of the empire was not Rome, but Axum. It was the empire that controlled Ethiopia. It was now Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan. It was big empire, and they actually did it before Rome did, by several years actually. Um, Now, because those are Black Africans, it doesn't fit the narrative very well. Constantine's the white Italian, and Axum's Black African, and so obviously, Constantine's worse, for some reason. But leave aside that small point. Um, it wasn't the case. I mean, there was Christian soldiers before 325 AD, but here's the thing: is that there became a point, and this is the way of life, is that you find yourself in charge, and you have to make decisions, right? Like there's this great book on the chiefs of staffs of the presidents of the United States. It's called Gatekeepers or something, and in it, one of the chief of staff says, the president never gets to make the choice between a good and a bad option. His like all his decisions are between bad options. Um, and because if it's between a good and a bad option, somebody below him will have made that decision. So he only gets the choice of bad options. And that's where what the kind of the realist position is, that we are stuck between always wanting a world in which we want, where the line we lay down with the lamb, and the kid will put his hand in the den of a viper and not be bit, and we'll pound our swords in the plowshares and our spears in the pruning hooks. That picture of the world is the one we want. But we have the world we have, and as a result of that, the the sages of Christianity, but not just them, like even before that, figured out that you have to make some there. Yeah, if you're going to go to war, make it ethical, make it, you know, uh, put some guardrails on it, right? And as a result, you get this concept called just war. Now, it doesn't just, I mean, again, it was beyond Christianity. I mean, Roman Cicero articulated it as well. And, it is an expectation that there's some universal truths, right? There is a universal truth. In a sense, there's God's law. Again, to quote Cicero, there's a law of Rome and a law of Athens, but then there's a higher law and a law that is beyond Rome and Athens, and that's positive. And so we are in the when we're doing and looking at and trying to be ethical in war, we're trying to apply truth in a very difficult in a very difficult environment, and war is one of those environments. And just to so all this, you gotta get this simply, and I'll try and be as simple as possible. There's two kind of areas where just war is focused on. One is like um, it's called like before the war. Before you go to war, what are the rules? And then the second thing is when you're in war, what are the rules? Right? So before the war, and there's some Latin words that are used and thrown about. I'm not gonna amaze you with my Latin. Instead, I'm just going to tell you that it's those two things, right? So before you go to war, you're like the criteria is it has to be the right authority, right? It can't be just anybody. It has to be the right people, and that authority is the state. It's pretty clear understanding that the state has a monopoly on the sword. That's in the Bible. You know, what is it? Second or First Peter 2. The role of government is to punish evil and affirm what is good. You have Romans 13. The government does not bear the sword in vain. Like it is the authority that is able to carry out war. And mind you, just because it is abused by some doesn't nullify the principle. Okay, I'm terrible at evangelism, but am I freed then from the obligation to evangelize? No, that's it's a similar principle to me with government. Just because someone doesn't like it's abused doesn't like destroy the principle. All right. Second thing is there a possibility of success? What is the chances that if we go to war that we're going to win? Because you don't want to like it's against the suicide mission kind of concept, right? Like that's a big part of it. Okay, so don't it's not a this is not a national suicide mission kind of thing. Okay. Um, Third is that in leading up to the conflict, it's the last resort, right? Like everything else has been tried. Now this point is the point that often is the biggest sticking point for it's called the Anabaptists or the neo-Anabaptists, the pacifists within the Christian world often say that it is here that it's war is not extended every single possible option, um, and that there's always hope. We can't go to war because we didn't exert every. And I think it is that's fanciful. I think by last resort, I mean take this war with in Israel with Gaza right now. I mean there's been every time or leading up to the war, even like after Hamas invaded Israel and killed 1,200 people and took a bunch of hostages, Israel didn't respond for a couple weeks. They I mean they bombed it, but it was defensive. But there was a chance. Hey Hamas, like, all right, lay down your weapons and release the hostages, and we'll figure something out. That didn't happen. And then finally, is the cause just? And in the case of the war in Gaza, cause is just, right? Israel was invaded, and their civilians slaughtered, and it is a defensive war. Um, so those are the four criteria. So like leading up to the war, this is before war. Is it the right authority? Is there a possibility of success? Is it the last resort? Have you tried everything else? And is the cause just? And so you can evaluate any war on those lines. Now, when you're at war, there are rules. Okay, uh, and there are less rules, but by one. But there's three primary rules for going to war. One, is when you're at war, it's this distinction between soldiers and civilians. Okay, Israel does that. Hamas does not. Hamas mixes itself in with civilians intentionally. It puts its rockets in churches and hospitals and synagogue or not mosques, and uses humanitarian facilities to carry out its attacks. Uses ambulances. The number of video and pictures of ambulances being used to transport Hamas fighters is like there's so many. And there's a steady stream of that kind of thing. Um, that is there's a proportionality, meaning like it is there's the for instance the target in Rafah, 250-pound bomb versus a 2,000-pound bomb. Why? Because they were trying to hit a very specific area in which Hamas had launched the rockets from, and they were going. It was very targeted, and it was proportional. It wasn't intended for the whole thing. And then, is it military necessity, right? Like, is it a military target? Um, and so you don't target civilians. Obviously, you don't target the non-military ones. And a bunch of these principles actually get weaved into the Geneva Convention on War, and you can read some of those too. But just to reiterate, on just war, when you're in war, it's three principles: distinction between combatants and civilians, proportionality, that what you're doing is proportionate to what the intended outcome is, and then it's a military target. And I think um, I think that this war that Israel is operating on is just, and I think that because I that's what I see, um, and I see Hamas acting unjustly. And I think it's important for Christians who are realists and recognize that there is going to be war in this world. I think we should remind this is, in some circles, this tradition of just war has been lost, has and it is important that we revive it, because we aren't living in a world of fantasy. I look out my window, it's not unicorns and rainbows and Skittles. Okay. It is a difficult world, um, seemingly on track to get more difficult, but we have to operate in the opposite spirit, but also recognizing that we have a world we want and a world we have. We operate in the world we have with hopes that it will help us, that we will we operate in the world we want, or towards the world we want, and we can shape it. We can shape the world. We can shape the current world towards the world we want. But we gotta live in the world we have. So that's the truth that I want to drop here at the end. And I really appreciate everybody who watches these Luke reaction videos. I'm Luke Moon. I'm executive director of the Philos Project. I hope that you like and subscribe to all of our stuff. Our Instagram and our Twitter, our Facebook, our YouTube. Right below us, you just click that like button, and anytime, or subscribe, and anytime I put one of these videos out, you'll get it. And so thanks for watching, and I appreciate you all. Have a good day.